Hello, everybody. I want to go ahead and get the program started for tonight. We're happy to see we have about 20 people in the room at Willamette 100, so a relatively small group. And we have, I think, over 50 on the Zoom, which is also nice to see folks joining in. 61 is what we have on Zoom, so very happy to see all of you. My name is Mava Souls. I'm president of Lane County Audubon Society, and we're happy to be doing this hybrid version of the Zoom. And the people that are here have the benefit of the big screen in the room and to see Bruce in person, and he's brought books and and it's also just really nice to see people for a change. So welcome to all of you, both via Zoom at home and in the room today. I do want to make just a couple of quick announcements. This coming Friday, we're going to do our second Box's Swift event right here on campus at Agate Hall chimney. As we were driving here to the room tonight, we saw the Cooper's hawk on the chimney, and we saw some swifts wishing they could go in the chimney, but they were waiting. And that is an issue with the Cooper's hawk. You can often tell when the swifts are in town by the Cooper's hawk waiting for them to come to the chimney. And there have been building numbers of birds. The birds are beginning their migration a little more in earnest now that we have warmer temperatures. So I'm hoping Friday night will be a good night for us to get together and watch the Box's swifts. So please come down and join us for that. We also are having our typical bird walk scheduled for May this coming month, and those are always fun for people to get out, especially during migration season again. So I will pass the mic off to Debbie. I think she's got one or two announcements as well, and we're happy to see you all here for tonight's program.
Good evening, everybody. Speaking of migration, I just wanted to let you know that we have just gotten word through Cornell Lab of Ornithology. They are tracking the migrating birds right now. And tomorrow is supposed to be a red alert night over Oregon. That means just thousands of birds flying over Eugene alone and many more flying over the skies. So let's do what we can to protect the birds that are flying over our homes. What we could do is to turn off any unnecessary lighting. Make sure that if you have security lighting, that it's pointed down and shielded above. Close your curtain blinds. If you have protective covering for your windows, please, because it prevents the birds from crashing into the glass. And mostly lights out for the migrating birds tomorrow night and for the rest of the migration season over the next month or so. And thanks for your help. I'll pass it over to Dennis.
Thank you, Debbie. I wanted to tell you a little bit about next month's program before I introduce tonight's speaker. Next month, we're going to have the program here also, 100 Willamette, and also be zoomed out, so you'll be able to do both. Next month, we have a program about the Himalaya Mountains. And this is a program that's not done by somebody who's visited the Himalaya Mountains once or twice. This is going to be by Bob Fleming. Many of you know Bob. He's done many programs for us. Well, Bob was born in a small town called Missouri. It sounds like the states here in the United States, but it's a little town and it's in the northwestern part of India in the foothills of the Himalayas. He grew up there all the way through high school. Then he came back to the United States to do some college work. And then he went back and lived in Kathmandu, where he did many years of leading treks into the Himalaya Mountains. He's an amazing person. He also went back here, got a PhD in, I don't know what it was, some kind of biological science. And so he's an amazing person. He knows these mountains. He has some incredible photographs, great storyteller, and you'll learn a lot about this amazing part of our world. So please stay tuned for that one. That's going to be a very good one, and it'll be pretty nice to see those photographs on the big screen here too. Well, tonight we have another amazing speaker. Tonight, this is one of these people that I rely upon whenever I have some mystery to figure out, like some strange mushroom or some strange bug or plant or anything that has to do with if it grows or crawls or it moves around at all. Our speaker tonight knows what it is and knows all about it. He's an amazing guy. He has his own company, Salix Associates, and they do all kinds of things with, checking out the environmental, your property, the plants on the property, native species, rare species, invasive species, figuring out all that sort of stuff. He's a great person for mushrooms. I know he's done several programs on those. And tonight, we're going to learn all about bees and other things. I was going to say the birds and the bees, but I'm not going to do that. About pollinators. And so I'm real excited to have with us tonight. Let's give him a nice warm welcome, Bruce Newhouse.
I have 2 copies of this book on my bookshelf at home called Bringing Nature Home. It's one of the best books you'll ever read about native plants and native bugs. And I'd really like to get this one off my bookshelf. And I asked Mava beforehand for help with this. I want to ask a question, and the first person to answer the question, and I'm sorry, you folks at home, hi. I'm going to be given away to somebody here in the room, I think, this time. But if somebody can tell me the name of the plant that the rufous hummingbird comes back north to nectar from, at the same time then the rufous hummer comes, this plant starts flowering. Does anybody know what plant that is? Raise your hand if you know the answer. Okay, that hand went up first, I think. Wow, she could have a Latin name. Ribes sanguineum. Yeah, red flowering currant. The name of the plant is red flowering currant, and it's Ribes sanguineum if you like Latin names. Yeah, red flowering currant. I'm going to talk to you tonight about native pollinators. Some of those are actually birds, and I'm going to talk to you about native plants that they really like, that pollinators really like to visit. I'm going to give you a little background first. Then I'm going to talk to you about some of the native pollinators that you might see in your yard or around your neighborhood in the southern Willamette Valley. And then I'll finish off by talking about native plants. And then I'll really finish off by telling you about where you can buy some native plants. And then we'll have some questions, and you can also come down and look at some of the books, my favorite books for plants. And again, you folks at home won't have the benefit of the books, but maybe we can arrange some way I can make a list of those. Maybe we could get those on the website. One of the things that's really neat about pollinators that I found out is that it doubles your fun. You have to get up really early in the morning when you want to go bird watching, because the birds kind of die down by 10 o'clock. Show's over. You can go back home and go to bed and catch up with the sleep you lost, or you can get ready for pollinator watching. So the birds quiet down, and the sun is coming out and getting warm, hopefully here one of these days. And that's when the pollinators get active. So around 11, 12, somewhere around, depends on what you're watching for. But anywhere around 10, 11, 12, when the sun starts getting warm, that's when the pollinators get active. So keep those binoculars out, put an extra power bar in your pocket, and pollinator watch. It's really fun. During my talk, I'm going to be talking a lot about native versus non-native stuff. And it was already in my first slide, right? Native plants and native pollinators. So what do I mean when I say native? And what do I mean when I say non-native? Different people have different ways of describing those words. For me, it's native species were probably here before your Americans came. So before around 1850. And they're locally adapted to our climate, our soils, and the fungi that live within them. All those kinds of things are things that develop over a long period of time, and it's called a shared evolutionary history when those things happen together over a long period of time. Some more examples of that are mycorrhizal fungi. The fungi that are attached to roots of trees sometimes develop over many, many years or millennia even, or even longer. Insect life cycles sometimes are dependent on when there's nectar and pollen available from plants, or when the plants leaf out. Like right now, the plants are leafing out. Well, the table is set for eggs to hatch and the little caterpillars to eat those, which means it's a great time for birds to migrate and power up food and fly long distances. So insect life cycles can be tied into plant life cycles as part of a shared evolutionary history. Another thing is that a lot of our invertebrates are really involved with secondary biochemicals of plants. What that means is things that the plants are doing that aren't essential to basic living, things that in some senses are important for living. If it keeps a herbivore away from you from eating your leaves, you develop maybe a poison, and over time that toxin or that poison repels herbivores from eating you. But if an herbivore figures out how to process that over a period of evolutionary time, if a species can deal with that, well, then the plant's going to get eaten again. Well, then the plant might come back with something new over thousands and thousands of years of evolution. And the insect and the plant might have a sort of game of who's ahead. That's happened, they believe, with monarch butterflies a lot, that monarchs have learned to incorporate the poisons in milkweed plants and makes them less tasteful to most birds. There's a few birds, I guess, that can eat them. I never knew that, but there are. Birds, as I mentioned, are really tied into the availability of insects, but they're also tied in sometimes to the availability of nectar and fruits, particularly hummingbirds and nectar, as we just talked about earlier with the red flowering currant. All these things developed in the Willamette Valley over tens and thousands of years or millions of years. Well, we say over tens of thousands of years, we stop there. Because they developed a lot under the influence of the native peoples who managed the landscape here. They managed by burning. And they did that so regularly that it greatly influenced all of the habitats here. So our habitats were predominantly prairies and savannas in the areas around here that we now think of as, well, as University of Oregon campus, for instance, and our house where we live 10 blocks away, and your houses, all that area is all developed, or it's been converted to agriculture, or the fir trees. Douglas fir trees, our state tree, has grown down and extended its range a little bit because there's no fires anymore. It just extended its range down into the Willamette Valley. So our native species developed under the regime of constant wildfire, not constant, but regular wildfires set by the Calapooias in this area and the Malalas and other tribal ethnic backgrounds, people of other backgrounds. This is just a pretty picture to let you know that I'm not going to just throw words at you all night. Picture from our garden. Non-native species, some synonyms for a non-native species are exotic or alien or introduced. Now notice I didn't say invasive. I'll come to that in just a minute. Human introduction of those non-native species has generally occurred in our area since 1850, since your American settlement of this area. And it's not really these species are not really part of the native ecology. But even so, they still may have some benefit to insects or to birds or certainly to us, because we introduce lots of plants that we value for their smell or their look or some feature about them that we really like. A few of those non-native plants escape, and a few of those escaping plants reproduce in the wild to the extent that they can alter the native habitats that are used by native plants and native wildlife. Those are called invasive species when they get to that point. Those are the ones that are problematic. Those can reduce our local native biodiversity when plants become invasive and spread to the extent where they sort of erase our native biodiversity and replace it with themselves. Non-native species can also bring pathogens into our native species, particularly the bees I'm going to talk about later. That's a really good example. Turtles are another really good example you may have heard about. Turtles that are released, they bring pathogens in, and when they're released, they can spread pathogens into native populations. And they can hybridize. Non-native species may hybridize with something that's native. They can hybridize and change. Part of biodiversity is at the genetic level in genes that are different because a species may be developing differently in one area than another area. And sooner or later, that species it may take thousands or millions of years, but it may become two species that can't breed with each other anymore. So they're unique. Local genes are really unique. And so when non-native genes come in and hybridize and change that, then all bets are off. And who knows what's going to happen, other than we lose some of that native specialness to our area, and that occurs. Pollination. What is pollination? Really quickly, it's a transport of male pollen to a female stigma in a flower. When that happens successfully, we get seeds. Seeds form. If that happens inside one flower, that's called a selfing flower, and that's fairly common. If that happens between a male flower and a female flower, that's a little less common, and I don't know of a good word for that. The third way that it happens that's, again, more common is between male and female flowers that are on, say, different plants or different places on the same plant. I'm sorry, if it's not on the same plant, that's the second way that's more in common. The third way is between plants, and that's called outcrossing. It could be males on one plant crossing out to females on the other, or vice versa, males over here being the pollens moving to females over here on this other plant. So it can happen any number of ways. That's outcrossing. So here in the upper right is the camas flower, which is flowering right now. It's just coming into its full beauty right now. It's the tall camas or Leckwings camas in the flower here. The lower left, there's kind of a fuzzy white flower there. That's lovage, not the European lovage here, but the celery-leaved lovage, which is locally native to our area. All good pollinator plants. These are the kind of pictures here, these mixtures and just lots of flowers. These are the kinds of gardens you want to try to create at home, and I'll tell you why towards the end of the show. So pollen then can happen by inside a single flower by close contact. You can have exchange of pollen from male to female parts in the same flower. It can happen with some plants, it happens through the wind. So a lot right now is the tree allergies. If you hear me coughing, it's not because of COVID, it's because of tree allergies, the pollen that's in the air right now. It's so thick. Most of our trees, many of our trees, at least the native ones, are wind pollinated. They don't need bees or hummingbirds or anything to help them do it. They just rely on the wind. So they put a massive amounts of pollen in the hope, or with the chance that one pollen grain will find its way to the correct female flower of the same species and pollinate it. Grasses will do that in a couple of months, so get ready. Water, a few aquatic plants have water carry their pollen around. Humans are great pollen transporters. We do that through horticulture, agriculture, silviculture, and we do it accidentally, just on our shoes or on our pants or shirts walking around. We might brush against the flower in one place and then brush against another flower in another place and thereby transmit the pollen. So animals is really what I'm going to talk about tonight. Animals are big in transporting pollen of flowering plants, the kind that don't rely on the wind. Animal transportation of pollen is done by insects, birds, bats. But here in the Willamette Valley, our bats that visit in the summer don't pollinate. Just the bats that live down in, say, the Sonora Desert, those I shouldn't say just them, that's the closest, the ones I know of that pollinate. So our bats eat insects and they eat pollinators. I guess we don't want to say that, but they do. Our pollination is done mostly by native bees, and then also best supporting actors are native flies, butterflies, and moths, which are pretty much lumped together. Butterflies and moths are in the same group, closely related, and beetles. Those are our primary pollinators, but some other pollinators have a little action in there, like hummingbirds, and I'll get to that. Bees are the most effective pollinators by far. When I talk about bees, most people think about the European honeybee because we're the most familiar with that. We've seen it the most, and we're just familiar with it in our gardens and so forth. And maybe there's even some beekeepers here in the audience or at home that are beekeepers. The European honeybee was brought here by the Pilgrims, so it's been in the North America for 400 something years. So it's almost like a native in some ways, but it is brought here from Europe. And, it's actually hybridized probably from several strains of different. They have several species over in Eurasia. There are several species. And in Africa, you've heard of the Africanized honeybee. That's hybridization of an African honeybee with some European and other kinds of honeybees. Bees are the best pollinators, and they transport pollen in a couple of ways. The upper left photo and the lower right photo show you a couple of ways bees transport, or show you one way bees transport pollen, and that's by being hairy. The bee in the upper left is transporting it through hairs that are on its upper legs and actually look like it's partly even on its back. It's a little species of, I think, an Andrena bee, and the Andrenas are very numerous and don't have any common names. So most of them don't anyway. The one on the right, you'll notice the yellow on the abdomen. That is the back part of the bee. The back half of the bee is the abdomen. You notice the yellow underneath, that's all pollen. So that group of bees, that family of bees transports pollen with hairs on its stomach. It's not accidental. They put them there. They take them to where they're nesting, and they scrape them off, and they use them as food for the young there. The bee in the lower left has little sacs on its. That's a bumblebee there that has a little sacs on its legs, and it sucks pollen. And I believe that one there, I believe the bumblebees there mix some nectar in that pollen and make it kind of a gooey substance that they can stuff in there. Why do they pollinate? Well, I'd say the whole thing is kind of accidental. They're really after something else. They're after maybe some nectar, or they're after some pollen to feed to their young. So why do they really pollinate? Well, maybe it's all accidental, just incidental to their other activities that they're doing. A few songbirds accidentally pollinate. Basically because they go after insects that may be affiliated or using a flower. Again, they might be eating other pollinators. Hummingbirds and bats, they're after nectar. That's why they're in the flowers pollinating. And again, bats not in this area. Bees are collectors of pollen and or collecting nectar when they're in a flower. Other insects are after nectar, or in the case of some of the beetles I've seen, they like to eat petals of flowers and other parts of the flowers. When a beetle pollinates, it's actually a kind of pollination that's so accidental, it's called mess pollination. The way I just remember it is to get in there and they mess around and accidentally pollinate. In so doing, in pollination, when the insect is helping a plant pollinate accidentally, we'll say, it's helping the plant produce seed and reproduce, and thereby the progeny of the bee or the fly or whoever's doing the pollinating is, in a way, ensuring that there's going to be plants and food available for its offspring too. That's kind of neat to think about. They're probably not thinking about it, but pollinators are getting a lot of press lately, and they're quite important. Flowering plants, native flowering plants, need them. About 3/4 of native flowering plants need some kind of pollinator to help them out. If you think of it from a human perspective, I've seen different numbers here, but about 1 of 3 bites or 2 or 3 bites of food that you take is probably there because some pollinator pollinated that fruit or vegetable that you're eating. Again, grass is being wind pollinated. Most of our grains are wind pollinated. They don't need animal intervention. Most of our grains, not all of them, but most of them. There is a pollinator crisis going on now too. You've probably read about that in the paper a number of times or read about it online. wherever your favorite news source is, about 60% of all flowering plant species probably are suffering because of pollinator scarcity. Some may be suffering a lot, and some may be just starting to suffer a little. We've heard that honeybees are really hurting because of colony collapse disorder. What you may not have heard is that native pollinators are equally or worse off. They're also steeply declining. And the reasons for that, some of the reasons for that is habitat loss. How many times have you heard that at a presentation or in your reading or in your own experience, seen it? There isn't much habitat left that's native, and what is left is fragmented and separated from other habitats or degraded. So another thing for pollinators is they need those native flowers around. Their favorites are the native ones. Remember, they've co-evolved with those. So the lack of native flowers in agricultural and urban landscapes is a real problem for the native pollinators. Competition or disease introduction from non-native species. Pesticides, there's another one you've heard a lot. Pesticides is a real problem. I just read an interesting report today out of Europe. It just came out. It's a fungicide they're using with crops in Europe to try to keep fungal spores from germinating and developing fungi and wrecking all the food. Well, bees that are exposed to that in the genus of, if you know the blue orchard bee or the blue mason bee, that's fairly common around. There's a species of that they looked at in Europe if it was exposed to the fungicide, it didn't shake right and didn't smell right to the females. The males, well, males always smell funny, but the males smell different, and they didn't dance right, and the women rejected them. The female bees didn't allow themselves to be fertilized by these males. That affected the reproduction of these bees. So by not an insecticide or an herbicide, but a fungicide too, can interrupt reproductive cycles and affect native pollinators. Climate change, of course, can upset synchronicity. If a flower comes up earlier than it used to, and it's going away by the time the native pollinator comes out and says, in my words, says, hey, you're always flowering at this time. Now you're coming out too early. That's a disjunct. That's a disconnection that evolution has to happen too fast. It doesn't happen that fast. So I'll just click it and see if it goes forward. It did. So other problems that we have with pollinators, besides those threats I was mentioning a minute ago, loss of habitat and pesticides and so forth, is we don't know what's out there. We have a pretty incomplete taxonomy and inventory of all our bees. And we have a lack of knowledge about the economy of bees, where they help us, where they're essential to agriculture. And again, it's not just honeybees, but our native bees are pretty essential to agriculture now too, they found out. Education and restoration information is lacking for bees. And there's a lack of funding overall that limits research and education for bees. So I've shifted into just bees right there in my talk, but it applies to all pollinators, really. So let's meet some of these pollinators and see what they look like. I'm going to go a little bit faster here to try to make up for a little bit of lost time, but bats, as I mentioned, we don't have here. They're in some warmer climates, but we do have two species of hummingbirds, well, about the same color, but it's more of a single dish-like flower. It's not a cluster like this one. And then this one, of course, produces the nice fruits later in the season that never seem to stay on the bush very long. Must be other birds eating those off the bush later in the summer. Those photos of the hummingbird, it says it up there, but they were taken by Bart Johnson at his house in South Eugene here. On the right side, you'll see pictures of the Annis hummingbird, our year-round resident. The upper picture I took in our backyard, it doesn't compare with the wonderful picture I stole off the web below it. The top picture is a female Annis nectarine on larkspur, which you will see more pictures of in the show. The bottom is the male with the beautiful magenta metallic feathers on the head. On the left side are two blister beetles. They're two that do mass pollination. They crawl around a lot in flowers. And on the right, we have a flower beetle that's called an ornate checkered beetle. And the bottom right is a longhorn beetle. Both of those are mass pollinators also. So as I go through these, I'm actually now going to go from the smallest, least important pollinators to the most important. So I started pretty low there with the hummingbirds and the beetles. Now we're going to move to the butterflies and moths somewhere in the middle. And I'm going to finish up the pollinators section with the big pollinators, the flies and the bees. So here in the middle, we've got these butterflies and moths. They're perhaps the showiest of all the pollinators, especially the butterflies, right? Everybody knows the butterflies. They need plants at two stages of their life cycles, preferably native plants, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to reverse the order here, though, 1 and 2. Number 2 is the adults need plants to nectar on. They pollinate those plants as they're nectaring on them. The adults generally don't live very long. You might see a swallowtail early in the summer and another swallowtail later in the summer, but they will be different swallowtails. They're different generations. So the monarch is the exception, the one that migrates. It can live for up to 8 months as it migrates south and overwinters in California. The other butterflies live for generally a week or 2, something like that, and they're gone. That's it. That's all they do for adults. Their lives are really all about being caterpillars. Matter of fact, there's a whole book written just on butterfly caterpillar. Right? They go through all their growth stages from, if you can think of how tiny a butterfly egg must be, to the size of a butterfly's body. That's a lot of growing. Once a butterfly is evolved or eclosed out of its case, it's done. All it's doing is it's a caterpillar that got wings to go find a mate. So really, it's all about the caterpillar, and it has generally 3 to 5 growth stages called instars. And they're what puts holes in your leaves, and you don't like it, but you like butterflies. So what's it going to be? Read Doug Tallamy's book. It's a wonderful kind of juggling of that, how you balance that and juggle that. So number 1 here, then, the butterflies also lay their eggs on larval host plants. And the caterpillars, when they hatch, then eat those host plants. And there's 2 kinds of butterflies, or 2 ends of the spectrum on butterflies: generalists and specialists. And it's a specialist of any group of species that really are vulnerable. If the specialist that needs 1 plant to lay its eggs on, and that 1 plant is gone, then that specialist pollinator is gone too. The generalist can adapt. A lot of those generalists even adapt to non-native plants. So if it's nectar thereafter, it doesn't matter too much if it's coming from a non-native plant or a native plant. If it's good nectar, they have their favorites, but adaptability, a generalist type of insect is a lot more adaptable and going to survive a lot better than a specialist is. Examples of specialist butterflies, in this case, are the Fender's blue butterfly, which needs 1 or 2 species of lupin to survive, the Kincaid's lupin and the spurred lupin, a closely related one, generally the Kincaid's lupin. Doesn't have those, doesn't survive. Another example is the monarch. It pretty much needs milkweeds, and if there's no milkweeds around it, it's out. It can't reproduce. Our major groups of butterflies in the Willamette Valley, we have the skippers, the little brown ones, more commonly later, but they can be found throughout the summer. The swallowtails, the whites and the sulfurs. Guess what color they are? White and yellow. The gossamer winged butterflies, which are a variety of colors: blues, oranges, browns, some are even greenish colored. They look like leaves right here locally. It's pretty interesting, or pretty close by anyway. The coppers. And then the last big group is the brushwoods, which are the biggest of the butterflies. I'm not going to show you all these here today, just to show you a few examples. One of the gossamer winged butterflies that might be in your yard is the gray hair streak. They really, especially if you plant native checker mallows, They lay their eggs on native checker mallows. They lay their eggs on some other plants too. So you may have them in your yard even if you don't have checker mallows. We have a lot of checker mallows, and every year we have great hair streaks flying around our yard. It's real fun. It's great. So I think they're using the checker mallows in our yard. Here's just a handful of some of the blues you might see on the rate, the silvery blue and the spring azure or echo blue. Those are the more common ones that you'll run into, especially right now. You might find the echo blue. It's a fairly early butterfly. Maybe not. Right now, it's a little late in the day and rainy, but on a sunny day, you could go out and see this at Mount Pisgah with not much problem. On the left side, the Akmon and the tail blue, a little less common, but they're both in this area. All these pictures are from this area. Brushwoods, which I was noticing today, there seems to be a theme here of a lot of orange and brown in these guys. The upper left is a fritillary, mostly gone from the valley. Violets are gone from the valley floor, and that is their sole host plant. Below that is a crescent. In the bottom left corner is a California tortoiseshell. They overwinter as adults. Any sunny day throughout the winter, you might see a tortoiseshell. They generally like laying their eggs on anything in the Ceanothus group. And we have several of those around the valley, mostly in the foothills and higher, but a little bit here on the valley floor. Strong flyers, good flyers, so the butterflies will certainly come down here and nectar. They just might have to go up to the foothills to lay their eggs. Moving to the right, the California sister, and then the Lurkin's admiral, and above that, a checker spot. So there's just some of the sampling of some of the brushfoot butterflies you could see. And then there's lots of moths that are around. Some of them are day flying, most of them are night flying, so we don't get to see them very much. I named this one in the upper left, the red rub lion moth. It doesn't have a common name, but it has this plush reddish color in the wings, and it hangs around closely with tarweed, one of the Native Americans' favorite food plants. Apparently, it's a favorite food plant of the red rope lion moth as well. There's somebody studying that down at, I think at UCLA, studying that relationship between the moth and the plant. Apparently, they lay their eggs on it, but nobody knows really right now. Bluebell moth in the lower left, the lower right, that sphinx moth there, the Clarkia sphinx moth, is a called up in a general group called hummingbird moths. We'll see that again in just a moment. Another one, matter of fact, right here. Upper left, the ranchman's tiger moth, very common in like the West Eugene wetlands. They lay their eggs on grasses, and they're not any too picky about what the grasses are. So they probably use some non-native things as well. I would call that a generalist. Lower left is actually a moth that is imitating a bee, the clearwing wasp moth. It's imitating a wasp. An owlet moth in the upper right. Below that, the white-lined sphinx moth is on there. It's on I think a horticultural larkspur, but they will also use our native larkspurs as well. And they're the hummingbird moth that you're most likely to see around these parts. A white-lined sphinx moth. We think we had one pay about a half a second visit to our garden the other night. We were standing out there and we were kind of like, what was that? It came and went really fast. I think it realized we were standing by its preferred flowers and it took off. When I say the word fly, you probably think of a house fly. Well, that's a fly. But there's a lot of flies out there doing a lot of neat pollination work that are not house flies at all. And some of them are quite beautiful, like the upper left. If I may call this again, the flying teddy. It's kind of like a round, puffy, furry little teddy bear, and they love that flower too. That one particular one is on. It's the rosy plectritis. They have a long proboscis, a long tube, feeding tube that goes down into the flower and gathers nectar from that. Then they are nest parasites on bees. On some bees, they will actually lay their egg in such a way that it will eat native bee eggs and larvae. And that's nature's way. It tells you you have a healthy native bee populations if you have the parasites there as well. Another interesting thing about these little bee flies, these bombilius they're called, is they seem to be more curious about humans. Taking a co-lead a walk, 6th year in a row out on Mount Pisgah, and it was last Saturday, and it's usually about late April. And these guys hover like right here and walk, and they hover right here. They're kind of like checking you out. And then they'll move on to the next person and maybe down here for a while. They hang around us. It's kind of interesting. The upper right is a flower fly or a hoverfly, also called. Generally, they're nectaring. I think some of these are parasites also on, or their larvae are really hard on some of the insects we don't like so much, like aphids. Nectar flies, dance flies, all kinds of flies. There's very interesting flies out there. They're different from bees. The first row there that's gray, the wing, the flies have 1 pair of wings. Going to the right, the bees have 2 pair of wings. The eyes are a little different. Flies have eyes that are really close together in the front, and the bee eyes are spaced apart a little bit. Flies have very short antennae. Bees have relatively longer antennae. Flies don't collect pollen, but bees often collect pollen. And flies tend to be attracted more to smelly things that maybe don't smell so good, like ossoberry, also known as Indian plum. If you smell that, it doesn't have a very attractive smell. Flies doesn't bother a lot of flies. They will pollinate that. The flies are often associated as pollinators. They're often associated with cooler weather and earlier season pollination, higher altitudes, and then plants with what humans think are not as good as smelling. Now the fun part, bees. There's about 4,000 bees in native in North America, and about 500, we think, about 500 in Oregon. There's a new project. If you want to Google it, if you're really into bees, you can Google the Oregon Bee Project or Oregon Bee Atlas. And there's an effort to try to catalog all the bee species in Oregon. The way they have to do that is by collection of them. I prefer photography myself, so I'm not going to be as thorough and dedicated as some of the people who are collecting the bees and killing them and counting the veins in the wing to figure out exactly what species they are. But I'm glad they're doing it. It's the first time it's ever been done. As Joni Mitchell said, you don't know what you got till it's gone, right? So we got to know what we have first, and then we can monitor it and try to protect it as we learn more about it. So I'm really an admirer of the Oregon Bee Project and the people working on that. There's a couple people here in Eugene that are very active in that. About 3/4 of our native bees are solitary bees, and 1/4 of them are social bees, and I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. Of the solitary bees, about 2/3 of them nest in the ground and 1/3 of them nest in wood. So if you caught all that, most of our native bees live in the ground. Cool, huh? They dig holes and live in the ground. So if you divide them up the way a taxonomist would into family groups, the groups of bees that have shared evolutionary history, you have the Bumble and Carpenter bee family that the honeybee is also in. The European honeybee is also a member of that family. The mining bees, the sweat bees, the leafcutter and mason bees, and the polyester bees, so named because of the census. We are also very, very fortunate to have this book available for free on the web. If you just Google search on bees of the Willamette Valley, and you also add the name. I don't know if August is listening tonight. If he is, he's probably shaking in his boots about me getting up here and doing what he's really, really good at. August Jackson, Yorkshire bee specialist. He works with the Oregon Bee. He wrote this book called The Bees of the Willamette Valley, and it gets you down to the genus of bees, the genera, but doesn't get you down to every species. That takes a microscope and a lot of patience, and we don't know all the species. But this book gets you to the genus of species. So Google the bees of the Willamette Valley, and if you need to add August Jackson, the author's name, it will take you to a Google Drive site, and you can download this and carry it around with you on your phone or your home computer or whatever. Great book to help you get used to the world of bees that's at your doorstep. Another way to classify bees is by how they nest. I think this is very interesting. At the bottom, we're going to get down to honeybees at the end, but I'm going to start at the top with the bumblebees. They form small colonies every year, and they nest in chambers. At the end of the season, that colony is gone. And I have another slide that will go through that in a little more detail. We have a lot of bees, as I mentioned, that nest in the ground, and they build their nests in tunnel fashion underground. We have bees that nest in wood or in stems that are either hollow or pithy. And then we have cuckoo bees that, like the European cuckoo bird, they lay their eggs in the nests of other bees. I mentioned a fly that kind of does a similar thing. Bees do that to each other as well. So there are a bunch of cuckoo bees. The honeybee is different. The European honeybee builds perennial colonies, and it builds honeycomb and honey and all kinds of good stuff to feed the hive through the winter. That's very different. That makes that hive perennial. For us, what's also special, besides getting some of that honey that they're storing for themselves, or so they thought, the other thing that's really great about the hive is that they're very portable. So if we need a lot of hives because the plant is flowering like the giant almond orchards down in California, they're all flowering at once. So they're reliant on people who have honeybee businesses to bring the honeybees in there to pollinate those almond trees at the same time. And then the business owners load up the trucks with the hives and drive off to the next thing. So they have these pollination gigs all around the country that they drive their bees to. We need honeybees and we need our native bees for lots of reasons too. So honeybees are different in that they build their hives they're designed to last perennially instead of just annually. For our native bumblebees then, kind of related to the honeybee, but this is how their life cycle goes. Starting about now, or say a month ago, the overwintering queen emerges. Actually, it was just a female, and it becomes a queen, a fertilized female, and it starts foraging and to gather up some energy, and then it also starts looking for a place to start a new colony. And they'll use abandoned vole nests. They'll use hollows behind the shingles in your garage, someplace that's a dark hollow behind your rock wall, in between your rocks. So they find a place where they want to start laying eggs, and they do that then the queen keeps foraging as those eggs hatch and grow, and she feeds them. When they are in the adult stage, they sort of take over the foraging. The queen can then just lay some eggs, and then the workers can take over and do all the work, all the foraging, and the queen's laying eggs and the foragers are bringing in food for them. And they build little honey pots. They build just enough little sugar water to get them through the season. And at the end of the season, some males are born, fertilize the females, everybody dies, except for those females that are destined to become queens for the next year. So it's not really a hive anymore. It's not really a colony anymore. It's nothing anymore. So if you were out on a sunny, rather warm winter day, you might also see a queen who's come out from her sleeping just long enough to get a little sun energy and see if there's a flower that's around. There's not many in the middle of winter, but the solitary bees then, so think of the bumblebee as being kind of social, or I guess the word for it is eusocial, E-U-S-O-C-I-A-L. They're kind of social. They have small colonies, but the solitary bees are just that, pretty solitary. The adults emerge in the spring, like your orchard mason bees, your blue mason bees. They come out in the spring and they mate. The fertile female digs her nest in the soil, or like the blue mason bee in wood. And actually, the mason bees don't dig in the wood. Wood nesting bees don't dig in the wood. They use old beetle holes that are abandoned, and they check them out for being just the right size and the right depth. And if they aren't, they use them. You can imitate the right size and the right depth hole at home. And I'll show you a picture of that in a moment here. So the female lays a single egg with provisions like bee bread, pollen and nectar kind of mixed together. And she will lay that with each egg so that when the egg hatches, the larvae has something to eat. In the case of, for example, the orchard mason bee, it's a mason, so it seals the chamber in the tube off. And so it can do the whole thing again, and then again, and then again, and produce a tube full of eggs. The same thing might happen underground with the ground nesters, just vertically. They might have little, I'll show you a picture of that in a moment, actually, what happens underground. And it can happen a lot of different ways. In this case, with the solitary bees, it's the eggs, the larvae, or the pupa that overwinter, not a female, like the bumblebees, the queen. Here's some examples of little nest holes. In the upper left photo, there's 3 real skinny arrows. They all make those better, but they're kind of upper left, below center, and center right. There's 3 little holes. Then you come down to the lower right photo, and it's much easier to see one of the holes there. Both of these bee nesting areas are in a burned area. Notice the ashes. Think of all those fires that the cowpoos used to set. Lots of good bee nesting habitat. Here's just another example of a beetle. Here's one where normally these bees, these metallic green sweat bees, are rather solitary. In this case, they decided to bend the rules a little bit. Bees sometimes do that. Several females banded together and built their nest underground together, and one of them is a guard at the hole, the entry station. This is on the south side of Mount Pisgah, right off the trail, right on the edge of the bottom trail that you hike on Pisgah. But it doesn't matter because this was several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and it wouldn't be there now anyway. But it could be happening in the area. Could be in your backyard or neighborhood park even. This is what it might look like underground. Each female might have a leg of her own to the nesting area. And off of that, each little cell might have an egg in it and some bee bread, some provisions of some kind. And here is the orchard mason bee or the blue miner bee in our backyard. We drilled the holes to the diameter and the depth specified. I think it's Washington State University website has some specifics if you want this kind of bee. Another way to do it is just drill holes of all kinds of different sizes. The important thing is don't use cedar, which has a lot of natural resins in it that the bees don't like, and don't use a wood that's been pressure treated because they certainly don't like the chemicals in there. We use firewood, just a piece of firewood, and we drill it. I think it's, I want to say 3/8 or something. I can't remember the diameter of the hole, but for these blue mason or orchard mason bee, I have 2 common names and I'm mixing them all up there. But anyway, it's the common one you can get in your yard. You can buy these if you want. You can buy fancy nests if you want. Round things with straws in them and tubes of all kinds if you want, or you can take a piece of firewood and drill holes in it. That's what we do. They will get fungus in them after a while, those holes, so it's good to refresh it every now and then so they have a new piece of wood without fungus in it to nest in. And I'm going to give you a few common bees of the valley, then I'm going to have to go really fast through the plants, I think, since we lost so much time here. That's a honeybee. The right side was to take a picture I took in Florida down there on a trip. It was a flicker box that was put up, and honeybees had taken over the flicker box. So that's an unfortunate little thing that happens sometimes. Bumblebee that's probably the most common around here is the yellow-faced bumblebee on the left. Notice between the eyes, on the front of the head there, between the eyes, there's yellow fur. There's also yellow fur on the top of the head, across the shoulders, a part of the bee called the thorax. And way back towards the back, there's a little ring of yellow on the abdomen. There are a couple of other little bees that are very uncommon that have a similar coloration, but we're just going to call them all yellow-faced bees since that's the really common one around. The bee on the right, notice those two photos, it doesn't have yellow fur between the eyes. The California bumblebee. So when you start learning bumblebees, that's a couple that you'll learn early on. Another bumblebee you're going to learn early on is the black-rumped bumblebee. You can see it a little bit in the right photo, the upper right. There's a little bit of a black rump there. Why didn't they name it the red-belted bumblebee? I don't know. There's probably another one back east. There's brown-belted back east. Anyway, it's one you might see in your own yard around town here if you have lots of wildflowers around them. Here's the mixed bumblebee or the fuzzy horned bumblebee on a native snowberry in our yard. Here's two bees. Yes, it's true. There are copulating bees. There's several things going on here besides that. One thing that's interesting is the female looks really different from the male here. These are carpenter bees that used to be found more to the south of us, perhaps because of climate change, getting warmer. Their range is extending northward somewhat. The female is big and black and shiny and pretty easy to tell apart from any other bee, I think. The male looks a little bit like some other bees, but if you're good enough, you can probably tell them on the wing. But another thing going on here is if you look at the head of the female, she's on a larkspur flower. She's on the spur, and in the spur, there's a hole right in front of her head. She's doing something called cheating. She's not pollinating, she's cheating. She has cut a hole, or she's using a hole cut by another cheater to get the nectar down in the spur without touching the anthers, without touching the pollen, the male parts of the flower that are sticking out. She's bypassing them to get the nectar. And so certain bees will do that. They'll chew holes in flowers. And you can see this in huckleberry plants or manzanita flowers. Those little lantern type flowers, they'll have a little hole in the bottom. And that's from somebody cheating. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Here's a picture again of that bee we saw earlier with the yellow pollen adhering to its bottom side of its abdomen. This one and the one in the upper right are both osmia. It's the group of minor bees, probably different species though. This is a long-horned bee. These things were fast and really hard to get a good picture of. Probably in the genus Eucera, and there's no common name, but they're cute. These, the green that you see there is actually metallic type of green color. This is in an Oregon geranium and I think probably a mule's ears, and I'll show you both those plants in a moment here. This is the milkweed flower. Now look carefully in the upper left of that flower cluster and the lower right center of that flower cluster. There's two little black bees in there. They are leafcutter bees, and they carry their pollen around on their bellies like the osmia bees do, the minor bees. So just to wrap up the bee part here, unfortunately, about 3/4 of the native bee species in the Willamette Valley have been extirpated. Let me put it this way, are thought to have been extirpated. The person who came up with that compared our habitats and our habitats, had they remained native, compared that to some sites in Northern California where there are some native oak and prairie habitats there. Granted, it's a little warmer there where you compared, but he found a lot more species there and wondered why, well, development and all those things I had on the slide, we've lost so much of our native bee fauna. So let's go through some of the plants kind of quickly here. We talked about the yarrow plant a little bit already. That's a good one. There's two species of wild onions here. The upper left one is perhaps a little prettier because it's darker, more bold colors. But the lower right one, I think, probably has a little more nectar, and it's doing great in our yard. Actually reproducing a little bit in our yard now and moving around a little bit. So onions are nice pollinator plants. Whoa, let me go the other way. Milkweeds are surprisingly good nectar plants. They are really good nectar plants for bees and butterflies besides the monarch butterfly. The monarch needs to lay its eggs on it, remember, on the leaves, on the stems, but the flowers are making nectar that's available to everyone. So everyone takes advantage of that. There's some beetles too that live just on milkweed plants. The center photo that's largest in the bottom there is the narrow-leaved milkweed, which you can't find around here yet. There are a couple of sites in our area where it grows wild. Dave Predick over there knows one of them, Mount Pisgah. Another one's out in the West Eugene wetlands. So someday we'll probably get some seed of that going in the nursery trade around here. The other milkweed here and all the other pictures, the upper left and the upper right, all those milkweeds are the showy milkweed, which there's plenty of seed and starts available for that. Both of these have really good, tasty flowers for pollinators and provide nesting plant for the monarch butterfly. And yes, we occasionally do have nesting monarch butterflies around here. I have a friend with a garden who has them, and I'm so jealous. They come to our yard and fly around. A female, I think, flies around once every other year, would you say, something like that, and flies all around our milkweed patches. And one year she actually laid on them, and we got caterpillars. And then I went out one day and the caterpillars were gone. So Scrub Jay or somebody found out that they could eat these caterpillars and clean them off. They were gone. So we didn't get any monarchs, darn it. Oregon grape is a wonderful pollinator plant, and I've seen hummingbirds work on Oregon grape. So hummingbirds will pollinate it, and it's a great early season plant for bumblebees. They like it a lot. Very showy, the Farewell to Spring or Clarkia. Moderately good nectar values, but it also has a value here where you can see the little notches cut out of the petals. Very interesting. Leaf cutter bees are so named because they take leaves and cut out parts of them and wallpaper their nest chambers with them. So there's leaf cutter bees that are doing that with these. They're actually petal cutter bees, I guess you'd call them. They're cutting their wallpaper out of the petals of these Clarkia plants. So wouldn't you love to see those wallpaper chambers? Boy, they'd be pretty pink wallpaper. Larkspur, tall larkspur, great bumblebee plant, great hummingbird plant, highly recommended. Oregon sunshine, great pollinator plant. This is what you strive for, just a mass of nice pollinator plants. On a warm, hot day, you can just pull your chair out there, and if your camera, if you want, with a telephoto lens, and if you're a real bug lover and flower lover, you can just sit there for an hour and watch things going on. There's that little green metallic sweat bee again in the Oregon geranium patch in our front yard. As pretty as any nursery geranium you could find. I think the native is great. Bluegilia, as you've seen in a number of pictures here tonight, is a very popular pollinator plant with lots of bees. This bee on the right there, that's black and looks like an ant with wings. Well, ants are closely related to bees, and it's a very tiny bee actually there. It's probably less than a half an inch long, probably more like a quarter inch long. This is the lovage, but the more I looked at this getting ready for the show tonight, the more I think that the picture on the left is actually an angelica, which only a botanist could love the difference, but just imagine those leaves are a little more divided up, that's all. So I think I fudged a little bit on that picture there, but the flower is correct in the upper right, and the flower looks correct on the left one. It's the leaves that are a little funny that threw me off. So lovage, and in the right, you see two pollinators there. The beetle is doing its mass pollination above it, a metallic blue-green, probably a cuckoo bee of some kind. Lupins are excellent bumblebee plants. This plant, Phacelia, is our native one. It's not too attractive for growing for show. The bee in the center photo in the upper center That is one of our yellowfish bumblebees, probably. At one of the showy flowers of the Phacelia. Well, it's not very showy, but the bees love it. There's good nectar in there. The bees really like Phacelias. When you buy wildflower packets, you can buy a Phacelia with a purple flower that looks better and apparently has some similar nectar that bees really like. And I wouldn't mention that if it were an invasive species, but I have not heard of that introduced purple Phacelia being a problem. I would recommend you get the native one because that's what the bees are more involved with. And just think there might be 4 other species of insects that need the native one, and you can accommodate them if you plant the native one. Rosy Plecritis, sometimes called sea blush, very nice pollinator plants. And annual, just what I do is collect the seeds of it every year, and then wherever we have open soil that year, throw them out again, get a new patch started. Here's some of Bart's pictures of the red flowering currant again on the left with the Hummer. And I guess, I don't know whose picture it is on the right, but it shows the red flowering currant more as a bush. Nootka rose, great pollinator plant. If you're in a small garden, I don't recommend it because it does spread. So it spreads underground by rhizomes. And it's, of course, got stickers, so it's a little hard to work around, but it's a great pollinator plant, as is this related plant, the thimbleberry. You can see there, I think there's bees in all of these pictures. Bumblebees especially love thimbleberries. This is a great bumblebee plant. California tea, I think it's generally called. Yeah, it's cut off up there too, and it's cut off down here. I think it's California tea. It's Rupertia physoides. That's the lightning, but it's in the pea family, and you've heard the expression leaves of 3, let it be. Well, this has leaves of 3, and you won't get any kind of toxicity off this one, but learn poison oak really, really well, and then you can branch out. This is a great pollinator plant. Bees love this Rupertia. Can't find it in any store yet, in any nursery, but working on that. Mad Dog Skullcap. Look at the bee flying in there from the right. They love it. The chickermellows, I think I've mentioned a couple of times tonight. There's 3 different species of them. They're all equally really good bee and fly magnets. Later in the season, the Canada goldenrod in the next picture here, the Douglas aster, these are real big players late in the season for pollinators. They need something late in the season too. So I recommend putting those in your garden if you can. Mule's ears or Rhythia is the Willamette Valley sunflower, but it's fairly short. It doesn't get much taller than, say, 18 inches or so. So you do want to try this at home. Here's I'm almost done, by the way. Here's the best planting practices that you want to do at home. Plant for blooms throughout the flowering season. Plant in large masses. Use plants from as close to your site as you can. Mostly people get plants from within at least the Willamette Valley ecoregion, the Willamette Valley. If you can get plants from the Willamette Valley, native plants, you're doing great. If you can get them from your own property or your neighbors or down the road with promotion, you're even doing better. Plants with spongy kind of stems are good. And then put up a sign in your yard to let your neighbors know what you're up to. You're making pollinator habitat. Otherwise, they might think you're a little funny for not having a regular lawn. This table I made is available through the Lane County Audubon Society website. This is the colors of all the plants that are blooming and the seasons that they bloom. So you can plant some that are, on the top left is early season, and those are the colors you could get. In the middle of the color rows there is what you get mid-season. The lower right's what you'd have late season. See the bottom 2 rows in the late season there are kind of golden and purple. That's the goldenrod that I just showed you and the aster that I just showed you. And I said those are good late season plants. So that you can download that yourself and play with that all you want. And things like daffodil ornamental plants don't have any nectar in them. They've been bred to look nice and often have nothing else to offer. So be careful when you buy, if you're trying to buy plants for pollinators and yourself, you can do it. You can do it easily. Things that look really flashy, really beautiful, you can find those, but not everything that looks flashy and really beautiful is good for pollinators too. So try to figure that out before you plant a pollinator garden. Some more best management practices: retain dead wood on your property if you can. Now that's antithetical to what we do. That, you know, we try to tidy it up, but if you can keep some dead wood and pithy stems on your property, the bees will love you. If you leave some bare soil, that's good. Don't put bark or mulch over all of it, because the bees, the ground nesting bees, remember, they're our most common bees. They don't like mulch. They like bare soil. That's what they dig in. So you don't have to leave very much, though. Just leave some patches of bare soil here and there for them. Keep things less tidy and don't use any kind of pesticides. Here's what we do in our yard. Actually, this is what we used to do. I'll tell you in a second what we do now. But in the fall, we cut the old dead stems off, because every stem, think of it as a bee hotel. You know, it's got bees and larvae overwintering in it. If you throw it on the side and put it in a compost pile or put it in the garbage pickup, they die. So what we do is sort of compromise with what looks a little nicer for our neighbors and what's healthy for the bees. We keep those stems upright where the rain will hit them and come off, and not make a soggy pile of compost with dead bees in it. And we stick them over on the edge of our property. What I found out is if you mix them up, they look pretty ugly, but if you keep them separate sort of by species, they look okay. And I said we do it a little different now. What I've been doing lately, the last couple of years, is putting them in big empty pots on our porch, pots that are full of flowers in the summer and are empty in the winter. We just take the soil out and put in groups of these dead stems. So we have little dried flower arrangements on our front deck in the winter. A friend of ours, Gail Baker, two friends of ours, Gail Baker and Clay Gauthier, have a wonderful yard. If you get a chance sometime to see it in town, this is a little more tame than our yard. It looks more like a landscape bed with a lot of flowers. Well, I think everything that they've got in there is a native wildflower. Yeah, so you can do it. They're doing it. On the Lane County website, also, a long time ago, I think you might remember this, maybe, I did a bird list, bird plant list. What plants are good for birds? I put it out on Oval, Working Birders Online. I got everybody's input, made a list of all the plants that birds particularly like in Oregon. So particularly in the Willamette Valley. So it's on the website too. This thing is about 6 pages long. This is one page of it that shows pictures of pollinator plants that are locally native and a little description of them. And those are on the LCAS website. And there's a little tab called Pollinator Friendly Gardening. And there's the blooming timetable that I showed you is on there. Pollinator plants, hummingbird plants, best overall birds and trees. And then every native plant in the Willamette Valley is on one of those handouts. So you got to have a lot of room on your computer for that one. If you want insects identified, like you have some decent photos of a bee, the woman who had the moth picture beforehand, your photo was really nice, and I had no trouble identifying that. But if you have blurry photos or too far away or something, try harder. Go back, get some good photos. Don't worry about identifying everything, especially not at first. Get some good photos and put them up. Join iNaturalist, put them up there, or put them up on Bug Guide. And in both cases, experts from around the country will look at your photos, and if they're good photos, they'll hang an identification on them for you. If they're not very good photos, or there's 27 species that look exactly like what you did, probably won't get much response. I mentioned the Oregon Bee Atlas already. iNaturalist has some good projects. The Xerces Society in Portland is, they have a bumblebee project. You can actually see where all the species of bumblebees in Oregon, pictures of them, and where their nests have been reported on a map of Oregon. It's kind of neat. And there's just some more pretty pollinator pictures, another pretty pollinator plant picture. And if you want to buy native plants, the Friends of Beaufort Park Native Nursery is a good place. They have a sale going on. Go online now for Friends of Beaufort Park. Click on Native Nursery, and I think it goes on through May 7th. You can buy some plants there. There's a company called Willamette Wildlings down in Cresswell. That's real good. There's several outlets now for anybody else got a favorite place where you buy a native plant.
Doe Creek Nursery.
Doe Creek, yeah, Doe Creek is a good one, really good one.
There's a new store, Trillium right on
Oh.
Highway 68, is a wholesale place, but they're open on Saturdays for retail. I've been out there twice. And then the plants are nice, the root development, the little orange pots are really good, so.
Okay,
Prices are comparable to Doe. I bought Doe business next to. Yeah.
Trillium Gardens, great place also.
It's before you get to Pleasant Hill, it's east of I-5. On the right-hand side if you're headed to Pleasant Hill.
It's those new big greenhouses there, right?
Yeah.
Plus some additional.
Houses that have been there for several years now.
Yeah.
They just started to open on Saturdays from 9 to 4, I think, for retail.
Excellent. Sheila is the owner of that. Sheila Karst does wonderful work also. Okay, thanks for thinking about native pollinators and plants, and I'll wrap it up with that, and we'll take questions both. I think we're set up from home and from the audience here. If Debbie will take them from home or whatever. So.
Oh, thank you very much, Bruce. That was amazing. That's a lot. Unfortunately, we'll have that recorded, so I'll be able to take some notes off of that, so I can, and also it's a lot of it's on the Lane County Audubon Society website too. So a lot of that information that you saw tonight, you can get. You didn't have to write it all down. So do we have any questions from anyone here in the audience? The question was, what kind of camera or lens does Bruce use for his photographs?
The question was about, taking good close-up photographs. Lately I've seen some really nice ones with phone cameras with attached close-up lenses on them. People can buy attachments now for close-ups.
Online.
Yeah, we have a question. Is there much research that's been done into the impact of vehicular traffic, both urban and interstate, in the Willamette Valley on pollinator populations?
No. The question was, has there been much research done on vehicular traffic and the impact on pollinators? And I don't recall ever seeing anything. There was a little discussion about that occurred one time in a meeting when we were talking about the Fenner's blue butterfly, because they're slower flyers. I'd worry more about them, but with bees being faster flyers, I wouldn't worry as much about them. So yeah, I don't think it's a terribly big issue for anybody, and I think that's probably why there hasn't been much research on that. Yeah, I think it'd be okay if you had a pollinator magnet garden on one side of a busy road and one right on the other side of the busy road, possibly, but the benefits of that might far exceed the occasional mortality that might occur. I don't know, I'm just guessing.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Bruce. That was great. And I think we're gonna close it off, and be sure that you remember next month, same place, we're gonna have Bob Fleming and the Himalayas. So a lot to look forward to. Thank you very much, Bruce.